Hi.
Hi, I don't know if is my mic on?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. I've been doing some tree pruning.
Fantastic.
Yeah, well, it's not the best time to do tree pruning, but I had a branch failure, so it was not an optional activity.
Yep. Sometimes you got to do it when you can.
Yeah, it was wind and weight brought down a branch, so not much I could do except prune.
Yep.
Oh, you changed your background.
There you go. And now you don't have to see my office.
I know, you're sitting outside, right?
Yep. Hi, Anjanette. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. Thank you.
Good. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, how are you?
Good, I'm doing fine. You look like you got new glasses.
Yes, they're just decorative.
They're just what?
Decorative, just accessory.
Yeah.
These aren't.
Right.
Minority.
Might smell burned English muffin pretty soon. Don't worry about it.
Okay,
Your camera working?
yeah.
Oh, here I am, right behind you.
Nice shirt, Bruce.
So Brian, did I miss the email with the link?
I think yeah, it should come from Zoom automatically the morning of the meeting.
Okay, that's what it was.
Yeah.
I was
Let's
Google or searching you, not from Zoom.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
This works. It's usually right there.
Subject line always begins with reminder. That's how you know.
Okay. Search for the reminders.
Hey, Angie, where's your background? Where was that done? That's a cool tree.
Hey, thanks. That is heritage tree number 4. It's in Southeast Portland.
All right.
Pretty cool.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Glad to see you. I am excited for a potential meeting with our commissioner, which I've been trying to get for months and months, and I finally heard, and I think it may happen sometime soon. So I'm not holding my breath, but I'm hoping it'll happen soon.
Good dark.
Yeah.
I think that's good because that's actually, we work with Jen, but we're actually the commissioner's commission.
Right. That's why it'd be great to have a meeting. So we've been I know we talked about it several meetings ago, but anyway, in the works. I have our, Brian, before we officially get started, we have public comments.
I have not received any requests for public comments. Looks like there are a few people attending, calling in. So if anyone would like to raise their hand, indicate like to give a public comment, I can give you access to the meeting. But looks like we don't have any right now.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting then officially. So we are recording, we are starting the Urban Forestry Commission meeting, September 16th, 2001. Great, a beautiful, crisp, sunny day here in the city of and region, Portland Metro region. Welcome all the commissioners. I think, Barbara, did you have something you wanted to start off by saying?
Muted.
You're still muted if you're trying.
Did
to
you
get
say 2001?
Oh, did I do that again? 2021. It's really funny you say that. I had an interview with this group StoryCorps, and we were talking about it, and I was talking with my son on StoryCorps, and I said 2001, and he immediately caught me too. I don't know why. I'm going back 20 years, rewound in my mind. 10 years. 2021. Thanks, Barbara. September 16th, 2021. In some ways, boy, do I wish it was 2001. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. I want to open the meeting with public comments. Doesn't sound like we have any. I want to also make a note that we're in conversation. I'm open to commissioner input on this about public comment process. I'm finding it really hard to manage public comments with the time allotted, and we talked about having a little more time for it, and that might be possible, though we're really going to move into like signing up ahead of time for public comments as a way to kind of manage that process a little bit more easily. And I encourage, and I think open to feedback about trying to maintain a way of keeping public comments to a certain amount of time given the agenda, but at the same time also finding ways to get everyone to hear what the community is saying. And so that's the important part about our work, is just trying to keep a pulse on what the community is saying. And so for this session, I think we're open to having public comments just through attendees raising hand or kind of checking in with Brian. So any chances for a quick impromptu public comment here today?
I'm not seeing any right now.
Okay. All right. And commissioners, you've all been getting comments by email and things like that as a result of Brian's ability to kind of channel all of that. And we're keeping up with public comments by email in between the meetings, and then we have these public comments as well. Today's a meeting. I'm going to try to get us out by 11:30. That's our deadline today. We don't have a appeal, so it really comes down to approving a set of minutes today. We have several months of minutes that we're needing to catch up on. So give you a minute to review the minutes, and then I need a motion and then a second, and then the usual process. And we're grateful to have Angie DeSalvo here. Jen Cairo's out. And so welcome, Angie. Good to have you here. And after Angie gives us a forester's report, and I'll mention Angie is the Science Outreach and Planting Manager for Urban Forestry in Parks and Rec. And then after Angie's forestry report, we're going to jump into pedestrian design guide, the guide update. And that's with Michelle Marks, who's the pedestrian coordinator for the city. Let me go with Megan and then Daniel.
I just have a question about the minutes and some of them. And Brian, I always want to start by saying I appreciate how much work you do on the minutes. I am about to give some feedback on them, but I want to know that I really appreciate your comments and work on it. But one thing that I noticed in the May minutes, and then something separately in the July minutes, like on the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework conversation, it really outlines kind of the bare tenets of what was talked about, but I guess I have a question about what the goal of the minutes are, because we also gave a lot of critical feedback about our frustrations with that framework, and that wasn't really captured in those minutes. And so some of that is trying to understand the balance of what the minutes are meant to represent. But I feel like we spent some significant time expressing that we are frustrated, and that's not really captured in those minutes. And I'll add that in the July minutes, where it talks about the public comments given by the executive director of Friends of Trees, I feel like he expressed a lot of frustration, and that wasn't really expressed in the comments. I feel like it came across sounding just like he was giving a report out, but I actually really felt that his comments were quite critical, and I don't really know if I think that that summary spoke to that. So I know it's a balance, but I just kind of wanted to bring up that question that I had about both of those and kind of what we're trying to go for when we capture minutes, and the role of tone, I think.
No, that's Megan. I appreciate that 100%, and definitely the goal with the minutes is to capture the tone and general sway of what was being expressed. On the May minutes, I'll make the changes to, I can add a few comments that are more specific to some of the frustration that the UFC was giving in terms of feedback on that project. And then on the July ones, I tried to capture the public comments fairly verbatim as best I could. I think it's actually the August meeting where I think the comments showed more frustration.
Okay, thank you for that. It's the dates blend a little, so
yeah, for
I'm
sure.
going to defer to you.
No, absolutely right. And but I'll have the August minutes for the next meeting, and I will definitely try to capture, because I do acknowledge there was a lot of frustration expressed there for sure.
No, thank you, Brian. And again, I
Yeah.
never wanted to seem you're the one that's
Totally
having
get
to
it.
then spend a lot of time with these minutes. Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Brian. Daniel?
Thanks, Vivek. This is a question, I guess, for Brian, maybe for Greg, maybe for Barbara. Last month, there was a discussion about appeals and an appeal that was on the docket. It was a Gravenstein apple tree. Is that appeal been scheduled? Do you have any update on that particular appeal, where that is in the process?
Yes, so I don't think that ever made it to an official appeal. That's a situation where a heritage tree in Southeast sounds like it's sustained some damage, and the property owner I think did submit a removal permit request, and a few urban forestry staff have gone out to look at it. I believe the situation is that where the urban forestry inspectors and a few went out there, deemed it healthy and not needing to be removed. I don't believe an actual appeal has been submitted at this time. But that's the latest I heard as of maybe 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard anything since. So I don't have any update beyond that, but I can definitely look into that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much, Brian.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Daniel. Daniel, I don't know if Greg came before Barbara or Barbara came before Greg, but Damon, do you want to go next? See you as top of my list here, at least in Zoom window. You're muted.
Sorry about that. In the May minutes, you know that I expressed support for the Friends of Trees program. I feel like I expressed support for planting both by BES and by urban forestry, and Friends of Trees planting pretty much. I think my comment was more along the lines that we need to plant trees everywhere. And
that's great. Thanks.
So
Okay.
thank you.
Right. Is it Greg? No, Greg just stepped back. Barbara? If I could unmute you, Barbara, I would. I don't know how to do that.
There we go. Okay. I just wanted to say, I think Daniel already knows this, but because he was on the appeals board for a while, but I just wanted to say that for those who aren't familiar with the appeals board, oftentimes somebody submits a request for a permit to remove a tree, and the tree inspector goes out, and of course they don't necessarily like the decision, and so they file an appeal. And they get another tree inspector, sometimes they get another one, and oftentimes Casey Dogurst, who supervises the tree inspectors and does many other things, goes out. And sometimes when, the staff with the city does a really good job of explaining to them that it's the same code that the appeals board uses to look at whether the tree removal permit should be granted or not, and whether the city forester made an error. It's the same code as was originally used. And sometimes at that point, even though they've filed an appeal, they will withdraw it. So just so you all know that sometimes things start out as an appeal, and then all of a sudden there is no appeal anymore. So it doesn't ever get to the appeals board.
Okay, thanks for the clarification, Barbara. There's nothing in the minutes related to that, or are you referring to a specific set of minutes that mention that, Barbara?
No, I was just clarifying for people that aren't familiar that sometimes, yeah, there's appears that there's going to be an appeal, and sometimes it never gets that far.
Great. Bruce?
Let's see, on the May meeting, we did review and approve the minutes of March 18th, 2021. And I believe at the May meeting, the date was May 20th, not May 21st. And at the May meeting under public comments, Roberta Jortner had some comments to make that it would be nice to capture some of that in the minutes, as she had some rather insightful suggestions and hopes. That's on the May minutes. On the June minutes, I believe we approved the minutes from April. And on the, I think that might be all I've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Great. Greg?
Yeah, I submitted my comments on the minutes to Brian. He's responded that he's made those changes. So this is really not part of our discussion, except that it's been brought up, and that's Daniel and the Gravenstein apple. I want to report from the Heritage Tree Committee point of view that we have not officially been, I mean, there's no, the process is normally if urban forestry feels a tree could be removed, if it's not a hazard, they would send it to the Heritage Tree Committee and we would take a look at it. I got word of this because Daniel was actually approached and he sent word of the tree to me. So I visited it, checked in with urban forestry, and I think they are probably going to just disagree with the owner, but we've been asked as a Heritage Tree Committee sort of informally to go and take a look at it. So we will discuss it at some point. We're in the middle of reviewing 2 years worth of nominees right now. So on the one hand, we're not going to have a whole lot of time for discussing immediately, but we are actually touring individually. So I'm confident that we'll all each get out and look at this tree as I have done. I believe Damon has already done. So we're aware of it, but it's not been forwarded to us for an official decision. That's actually in the purview of urban forestry staff.
Yeah, Greg, thanks. And I'll I put this in the chat, but just so everyone hears, I did just get confirmation that there is no active appeal yet on that tree. So that's where that's at. Bruce, thanks for all the comments. I'll go back to the recordings just to confirm those additions. And if I miss those, I will add those in. I think if we can do if that's all the changes, if we can do a single motion for all 3 months of the minutes to approve those. And then Vivek, we actually do have someone who'd like to provide a public comment. They just let me know. So maybe if we can approve the minutes, we can do that public comment, and then we can get on to Angie's part here.
Okay. Okay. And then just May minutes, second to last bullet instead of ream team. So just an R to a T. That's a small suggestion that I found. Great. So can we have a motion? So I think the motion Brian requested was the set of minutes, May, June, and July.
Yep.
With the friendly amendments that were just offered. Okay, Barbara.
I would make a motion that we approve the minutes with the friendly amendments that Greg has already submitted and that were suggested by Bruce.
Okay, do we have a second? Bruce, second. Okay, all in favor, virtual hand or physical hand? I can observe, looks like I see a few, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 5 hands up. Any opposed? 1.
I made actually some notes as well on that.
Okay. Okay, and then abstentions? 1, 2.
Basically, I didn't attend the May meeting, so lumping them together means I would abstain on May and vote yes on the other 2.
Okay. So that's one issue with the grouping of the minutes, I guess, is that we run into that abstention issue. Do we have quorum to pass the minutes though? I counted 5, which I think is quorum.
Yeah, it's just a majority of the ones here. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, so moved. Thank you all. And just thanks for the comments about the apple tree. I think I see a sequel to James and the Giant Peach. It would be Daniel and the Giant Apple Tree or something like that. I'm gonna go on to a public comment.
Yeah, Robin, I'm going to give you permission to come on to the meeting and speak here.
Okay, Robin, the floor is yours for public comment. I think you have to unmute. Uh-oh, we're not getting an unmute from Robin here. Oh, there we go.
Are we good?
Yes, we're good.
Oh boy, thank you, commissioners, for taking this up. Ours was a very model of a heritage tree. The grassy area around it drew kids' ball games, hosted neighborhood gatherings, and stood its ground against developers. But most of the tree split and fell, and what's left of it is dangerous. A certified arborist calls the tree a hazard, and our homeowner policy agrees. Insurers just won't cover a 100-year-old Gravenstein. Risk of damages, therefore, going forward could be highly consequential, not just for us, but for the city of Portland. 3 months ago, we applied to remove and replace the tree, but the process appears to be never ending. Please help if you can to speed things up. We're frustrated. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Appreciate your comment. So noted. Great. So I'd like to move on with time here to Angie and the Forester's report. And so let's just, can we transition to you, Angie?
Sounds good. Can you all hear me?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me today. I'm happy to fill in for Jen while she is taking some much needed time off. I have a couple of announcements, and then I'm actually going to ask two other folks to speak on my behalf. Brian is going to give a very brief update on the Title 11 amendments work that's happening, and Casey Jogerst has a new team member that she would like to introduce. But first, I have three brief reminders. The first is we're very excited to announce that our 5th yard tree giveaway is open for registration. This year, we are giving away 1,800 trees. Most of those are large evergreen and native trees. And all you got to do is Google yard tree giveaway Portland, free yard trees, one of those things, and you'll find it. You can sign up for up to 2 trees per household and pick up your trees at one of 5 events around town. We're also offering delivery for a few focus neighborhoods and planting assistance for anyone who needs an accommodation. And so as commissioners, we'd love you to help spread the word. And if anyone is interested in doing outreach or door-to-door work, we have packets available with door hangers and flyers and social media postings. We're happy to share those with you. Just reach out to me. And we're pretty excited to see those trees get out there in the world. The second thing is that I believe next month on your agenda, we will be bringing to you some nominations for the Bill Nato Award. And so just wanted to put that out there that you'll be getting a packet of folks who are nominated for that award. So give it a read ahead of next week's meeting. And we're excited to recognize some of the individuals and groups who have been really doing some great efforts at improving our urban forest and canopy here in Portland. And then lastly, believe it or not, it is already time for our fall Arbor Day celebration. This year, Arbor Day will be again small, given COVID and other restrictions. So on Saturday, October 30th, we'd love to invite you out to Lentz Park, where we will be planting a handful of trees, around 10 or 12 trees with community members. They're part of a larger planting that's going to be happening at Lentz Park. I think we're planting around 30 or 35 new trees in that location this year. But we'd love to invite you out, get some new trees planted, take a moment to celebrate trees, kick off planting season, and also really get these high-performing big trees in a neighborhood that really needs them. As you know, Lentz was sort of the epicenter for some of our heat events this summer. And so we're excited to see more canopy go in to help mitigate. So that's all that I have for my report. I'm going to turn it over to, I think Casey's, do you want to go first, Brian? We'll let you go first, and then Casey, she's still connecting. She'll go right after to introduce Pete.
Yeah, that's great. I have a pretty quick update. So want to give the commission a quick update on the Title 11 amendment project that Nick and I gave a briefing on, I think about a month or 2 ago. This is the project that is fairly narrow in scope. It's focused on technical and minor policy changes. So it's largely about creating some clarity for parts of the code that are a little bit unclear, standardizing. There are some parts of code where current practice is in place, but it's not fully reflected in the code, or the code may have some conflict with other city codes. So it's sort of like a cleanup project in a lot of ways to make the code work better. We are very close to being able to release the list of proposed amendments. It's going through a sort of internal process to really be to the point where they are formally proposed amendments and not just ideas right now. We are pretty much any day now, probably potentially tomorrow, maybe early next week, we'll have a web page set up that's specific to this project. It'll have the list of amendments on it. And we'll have an email address on there for anyone who wants to send any responses to the proposed list. It's probably going to be around 30 to 40, which I think is the number we had in mind when we started this, about where it would be. And let's see here. I will likely have some time on the October agenda to go through that list with all of you. So that you'll have it ahead of time, and then we'll have maybe a half hour of the October agenda to explain any of them, hear your feedback. And the goal of the project right now in terms of the timeline is that by the end of October, we will have finalized the list of amendments that'll be moving forward. And then really November, December, maybe into January is when the actual language of those code amendments will be drafted, and then probably start to have public hearings in March to really move those forward, with the goal of getting them to City Council by April or May. So that's what the next few months is going to look like. Really, in your inbox in the next few days, I'd expect the list of amendments to show up. All right, looks like Casey is here and Pete is here as well. So I'll turn it over to you.
Welcome, Casey.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I'm Casey Jogers, the Permitting and Regulation Manager in the Forestry Division. So supervising all of the tree inspectors as well as our tree technicians who manage the tree hotline citywide. But I just wanted to take a couple minutes because we have a new supervisor that started with us today, Pete Walter. Bear with us. Oh, there's his face. We're still working through some technical difficulties. It's, only been a couple hours on the first day, but he is here with us. And he's going to be overseeing the development component of permitting and regulation. And so I think for the most part, based on what I've heard in these meetings, you're all familiar with that, but those are both private developments. So your residential, commercial buildings, tree preservation inspections, as well as capital projects, because our development side of tree inspectors is made up of two different groups. That is capital as well as private development. So I just wanted to come and let you see his face, share what his role is, and if technology is working, give Pete an opportunity to just introduce himself to you all and give a little bit of information on his background. So I'll turn it over to you, Pete, if it's working.
Sounds like his audio is, oh, it is working, never mind.
Okay,
right.
so the computer mic works.
Welcome,
Hi,
Pete.
everybody, thank you. It's great to be here. Kind of absorbing a lot this morning. I recently was with Oregon City for 15 years as a senior planner, but I have a forestry background as well. I spent a lot of time in Oregon City doing tree regulation and natural resource reviews, as well as development review and that sort of thing. I think you all got a bio via email, so I won't belabor any of the points in there. Just happy to be here and looking forward to working with everybody. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Casey.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pete. And most of the folks here have not received that, but Brian, if folks are interested, you could take the introductory email and share it with the Forestry Commission. Great, thank you so much, everybody.
All right, thank you, Casey. Thank you. Welcome, Pete. And thank you, Angie. Is that full circle? We're full with a Forest Service report on your end?
You got it right on time.
Oh boy, am I excited about that. Yes, thank you. Right back. We made up a little bit of time here. That's always good, without especially cutting people off. And so we're gonna transition then. And I think I noticed Damon's hand, and I want to make sure if you can be quick, Damon, and see, do we have Michelle here yet, Brian?
Yeah, not yet. I know that Michelle is at DRAC, the Development Review Advisory Committee. Giving the same.
I see Michelle's name in the attendee list.
Oh, she is. Okay, I will move her in. But then,
Damon, while Michelle gets connected, do you want to comment?
Perfect. Casey, I was just wondering, so is Rick Faber being split into then Pete, and or how's that going?
Yes, so Rick Faber is not a supervisor and has never been a supervisor with us. He's the permitting and regulation coordinator. He'll continue to retain that role. And so he works very closely alongside me as the manager in all respects of permitting and regulation team. So he will work closely alongside with Pete and myself, but he'll still have engagement in non-development, enforcement, the tree tech stuff. So just to clarify, yes, he's not been a supervisor in a way de facto, I guess, because we only had managers. So he's been a significant support and help. But with Pete here, and as we get our other supervisor going, Rick should be able to move back into more of the coordination role that he was originally hired for.
That's fantastic. He's a great resource, and I'm sure he'll be a great resource to Pete too.
Yeah, absolutely.
The clarification, Damon, and thanks again, Casey. Michelle, welcome to our September Urban Forestry Commission meeting. You all commissioners may remember Michelle, who's been here before, pedestrian coordinator, pedestrian design guide, and this is the update. So it's been a few months and we're all eager to learn about what you've been up to, how the process is going, and we'd love to know if there's specific input you're looking for from the commission at this particular phase in the process, how we can best support you in doing that work. And of course, I think you'll hear a lot of other things coming up as well, but if you have any ideas of how we might be able to support you, do let us know. But I'll just turn it over to you. I think we've set aside a good chunk of time of this meeting for you. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you and help frame up the conversation.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. And I see my colleague Gina Gastaldi has joined me. Thanks for renaming yourself, Gina. There were two Michelles there for a minute. Thank you so much for inviting me back and for having me again. I do, have some exciting updates to share with the commission. So as you know, we've been working hard on this document for the last year and a half, and are finally getting ready to release a public review comment draft next week. So I'm here today to kind of give everybody an overview of the content in the document, to draw your attention to some of the key elements you'll see, especially, of course, as they relate to street trees and some of the new kind of provisions we've included. And I guess my ask of the commission is to review this next week when it comes out. It'll be out for 30 days, so there's certainly no rush. And I'll leave it to you all whether you'd like to provide me comments individually as individual commissioners, or if you want to provide a single letter, if your comments are coordinated, and provide me a letter as an Urban Forestry Commission, that would also be welcome to us and our team. So either way is great for us. I'll let you all deliberate. But in terms of getting the document to you, Brian, would it be okay I expect the document to be released probably next Tuesday or Wednesday. If I send a copy to you, would you be able to distribute it to the commissioners?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to get their hands on it. So I'll make sure that we get that in Brian's hands. I guess that's where we are in terms of process. We're really excited to get this out and start to get stakeholder and public comments. I think there are, as I mentioned, a lot of really new kind of cool and exciting design treatments and opportunities in the guide that haven't existed in our 1998 pedestrian design guide. So if it's okay with you all, without much further ado, I'm happy to just share my screen and start to walk you through the draft document and share what's in here, what you'll see next week. Right. Share my screen.
Daniel, did you want to ask, is your hands up? Before Michelle jumps in, did you want a quick clarification?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Just wondering, we have a policy committee that separate from this meeting, we look at various proposals coming from different city departments. we're meeting next Monday. I'm wondering if you could get us a draft of wherever it is for our Monday meeting so our policy committee could take a look at this.
Oh, I wish I could, Daniel. We are frantically making technical edits right now. We received over 300 technical comments from our internal bureau reviewers. So it's sort of a race against the clock. I will try, but I can't promise.
How about the presentation you're giving today? Would it be possible for us to get a hold of that?
Well, I can't. What I'm going to do is walk you through a working draft. And I'm just worried that you won't be able to see some of the edits we're making if I give you an old draft. That's my concern. What time are you meeting at 3 on Monday?
5:15.
Okay.
Wait, 5:45. Sorry.
5:45. Yes. Okay. I will commit to getting a draft to Brian probably midday for you to review. And if there are any outstanding edits that haven't been made to the draft yet, I'll just make that known to you. If you just promise not to disseminate it far and wide, since it will be a working draft.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
we just want to be able to talk about it at our committee and
Understandable.
yeah. Okay,
Meeting
great. Thank
at
you.
5:45.
Thank you very much.
So I'm just making a note to send something to you midday. Okay.
Thank you.
Of
And
course.
Michelle, would you be open to one more question?
Of course.
Okay, before you get started, Bruce?
I wanted to know, it's part of Daniel's question, but if it's released to the public and if the time period before you closed it or whatever was October 30th or something, I mean, do you have there are two aspects of it, when you release it to the public and when is the drop dead date for accepting public comment?
Mhm.
So has the latter been established?
No, sir, that drop dead date hasn't been established. We've been waiting to kind of finalize what our actual release date is because we want to be sure we're providing at least 30 days. I expect we'll probably end up doing, as you suggested, just saying the end of October, because that's, 30 plus, and that's a nice cushion. So I like that suggestion.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Shall we
Okay.
jump in?
Yeah, let's jump in.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for all those questions. All right. I'm going to share my screen. And as I mentioned to Daniel a moment ago, what you're going to see on screen is a working draft that doesn't include all of our edits yet. So take it with a grain of salt. All right. I'll share my screen. All right. Can everybody see? All right. Okay, so let's start to walk through this thing. As I mentioned, this is, a 20-year update to a 1998 guide. So we're really excited about some of the new content that you're going to see in here. And just to, I've mentioned this multiple times, but just to clarify, the material that's going out for public comment next week is the sidewalk corridor section of the document. We'll be coming back once we have funding to address phase 2 of the work, which is volume C here, corners and crossings. Of course, a section we'll be hoping to pull you all into again when we embark upon that. But we really are just focusing on letter B here, sidewalks and walkways. So we've tried up front to provide just some more robust background and clarification about what this document is and who the intended audience is. So just to be perfectly clear, this is a document that's intended to guide internal capital projects, but also private frontage improvements that are associated with private development activities. So there really is kind of a twofold audience here, and we're trying to kind of walk that line and be clear about which sections relate to which audiences. And also trying to provide some clarity behind what happens when PBOT or the city adopt a streetscape plan or a local area plan? What do you look to for guidance, and trying to be clear that while the pedestrian design guide establishes really the baseline requirements for sidewalk design, when there is a streetscape plan, when there is a local area plan, that really desires something special, some special treatments to sidewalks, that will supersede the pedestrian design guide. And I know I've mentioned, this to this group in the past, but, and I just, drew the DRAC's attention to this too, but probably the biggest structural change from the old PED design guide to the new is that whereas the old PED design guide sidewalk corridor requirements were tied to pedestrian classifications, the new guide ties them instead to street design classifications. And so the document really tries to help people understand what those are, and tries to clarify that street design classifications really in the TSP are intended to marry the design of the street to what's happening behind the property line. So trying to tie land use and transportation functions together. And we will, I think, as a city and as an agency, be looking to these street design classifications much more in the future to kind of guide our activities. So I think, everybody in this audience is familiar with the 3 zones of the sidewalk: the pedestrian through zone, which is the element of the sidewalk that's intended for, pedestrian travel and really should be clear to allow for those mobility uses. The furnishing zone, which, as you know, is intended to accommodate trees and stormwater functions and all the softscape as well as hardscape elements like streetlights and utilities. And then the building frontage zone, which is intended to kind of provide a transition between the building face and the clear zone of the sidewalk. And we've added some content here that wasn't in the new guide that you'll see on pages 11 and thereafter, really trying to clarify why these widths for these 3 zones that are prescribed in the PED design guide are the widths that they are. Why are we, requiring 6-foot through zones on one type of sidewalk and 8 in another? Why are we requiring, 2.5-foot frontage zone widths on this type of sidewalk and a 6-inch frontage zone on this sidewalk? So trying to clarify what is the purpose of each of these zones? Why are they the widths that they are? So hopefully that intent language will help folks understand, why our sidewalk corridor widths are as they are. And then, the meat of the guide is this updated table B3 that we've shared with you in the past, that you'll see on page 15. And, as we've discussed at previous meetings, one of our objectives here has been to not increase the overall width of the sidewalk corridor, whether that be 15, 12, or 11. We really don't have the leverage to be able to require wider sidewalk corridors in Portland than we already require. But we've really tried to be very intentional about how those widths are distributed amongst the 3 zones, and have really kind of played with those distributions in the updated guide. I mentioned this in the last hour, but and you all know, we have tried to move heaven and earth to try and provide as wide of furnishing zone as we possibly could. And in some of these street types, we were able to, shrink other zones and provide 5-foot rather than 4-foot furnishing zones. In some sidewalk street types, we couldn't figure out how to get this done. But as we move through the guide, I think you'll be encouraged by some of the other ideas that we've put in here to try to maximize opportunities for soil volumes and street tree provision. We've got some kind of new stuff in here that, I think will help mitigate for those circumstances where we couldn't provide more width in the horizontal, in the x-axis, but we've been looking at what can we do on the y-axis, what can we do on the z-axis, you know, what else can we do? So I think we've provided some really cool new opportunities that I certainly want to draw your attention to. I will also say that, you know, while this guide, you know, doesn't address planting specifications and planting requirements below grade. For example, you know, we do not have the leverage or authority in our guide to establish requirements for subgrade soil cells, for example, or, you know, structural soils. That really is, you know, the province of urban forestry's planting requirements. We've had a lot of internal conversations between our bureau and forestry about, you know, how we can be of assistance moving forward and an ally to help change or update planting specifications moving forward. So I want you to know that that is something that's certainly on the PBOT radar and that we see ourselves as allies in. So moving forward. So as mentioned, the new table B3, I keep forgetting the number of it. The new table B3 establishes the standard sidewalk widths. We do also have a section that follows that allows for variations to those sidewalk corridor widths in certain circumstances. One of those that you'll see at the top of the page here when you review your draft on page 16 is an allowance for when we're not able to obtain the full furnishing width required in our new table B3. We have a provision allowing tree wells to encroach into the pedestrian through zone, provided that those tree wells have a walkable surface, an ADA compliant walkable surface in the form of, it could be tree grates. I know tree grates are kind of, you know, falling out of favor these days. It could be rubberized mulch with a walkable surface. And this is our way of trying to come to compromise between everybody's objectives, trying to find something that works for everybody. We also, you'll see on the bottom of page 17, provided some new kind of graphic and textual clarity about, okay, what do you do in instances when you have extra right-of-way beyond the 12-foot corridor or the 15-foot corridor that's required, because this is something that does happen. And, you know, I know these issues sometimes historically have been batted around between development review staff trying to figure out how to allocate that extra right of way. And so in our draft guidance, what we're saying here is when there is extra right of way, it goes first and foremost to the furnishing zone. And the intent there is to provide those more robust kind of soil volumes to allow for larger canopy trees and recognizing that that is a city objective. And so we've clarified that in figure B10 here. All right. The new guide also provides some clarification and guidance for the design requirements of the furnishing zone. You'll see that in section B23 here, which start on page 19. And so one of the things we've done here, you'll see, is we are proposing widening the length of tree wells where tree wells are required and appropriate. Whereas our current standard plan shows that tree wells are to be 6 feet long. We are calling for tree wells that are 30% larger, so 9 feet long. We had to work in 3-foot increments in order to make the standard sidewalk scoring pattern match up with the tree well, just for constructability reasons. But that is a 30% increase. And again, here, this is our attempt to increase soil volumes, recognizing we weren't always able to get them as wide as we wanted them on the x-axis. So looking for ways to increase soil volumes on the y-axis here. So this will require an update to standard specifications for tree wells, but we would, include that as part of our adoption process. We've also tried to provide some clarity regarding when tree wells with hardscape between them are appropriate and when continuous planting strips are required. So we've taken that content directly from an existing administrative rules and translated it into the table you're going to see on page 20. One edit here, and fundamentally what you'll see here is in residential zones, this is, in accordance with what's currently required in residential zones. Continuous planting strips are appropriate, whereas in commercial zones with higher intensity pedestrian traffic and much more movement between the curb zone, people parking, and the building face, we call for hardscape between tree wells. But one edit you'll see to this table next week, which is kind of buried in text in our working draft, but we're going to pull it out to the table, is a brand new provision that says no matter what zoning district you're in, no matter what type of development you're providing, if there's no on-street parking on the curb, you can provide continuous planting zones regardless of the type of development. And this was our attempt, again, to maximize soil volumes, to maximize permeable surface in the city. We really wanted to expand opportunities to provide for those connected soil volumes. Right, so I'm going to just keep moving. You'll see some stuff that probably, is less interesting to you, like how to site transit shelters and benches in the sidewalk. Maybe you do care as a person who walks on city streets, but we've been working with TriMet on clarifying how transit infrastructure relates to the sidewalk. You'll see elements that really speak to, PBOT capital projects where increasingly looking to provide kind of new bicycle facilities that elevate cyclists up to sidewalk level and provide a protected place to cycle. So clarifying the relationship between that bicycle infrastructure, bus stops, the sidewalk, making sure, it's clear how we're going to keep everybody safe and comfortable. And then you'll see, some clarification for when sidewalk encroachments are required. And then again, some more guidance for capital projects, not so much private development frontage improvements, but capital projects that provide sidewalk level bicycle facilities for how those should be designed. And what you'll see is, some clarification for what kind of buffers are required between the pedestrian zone and the bicycle zone of the sidewalk, where street trees should be provided, how street trees should be provided in these types of facilities. So looking forward to your comments on that. Again, some clarification for PBOT project designers on how you design pedestrian and bicycle facilities when they're adjacent to each other on a sidewalk, and how those facilities should adjust as we provide them in constrained situations, which sections of the sidewalk get narrowed in what order. And then the next big section of the document, that I would appreciate your comments on and review of are variations for standard sidewalks. What we've walked through thus far really are kind of the standard requirements, but we understand that, there are always going to be site constraints. There are always going to be, issues like topographic constraints or environmental hazards or existing site conditions that preclude us from being able to provide the standard improvement. And so we've tried in this guide to be very clear about, okay, what gives when you're constrained? And so the diagram here in section B5.1 walks through the process for how you kind of gradually narrow a sidewalk when you are site constrained. What gives first, what gives second, what gives third, all the way until you get down to steps 5 and 6 here, which nobody wants to see, which is where the furnishing zone is completely eliminated to respond to those site constraints. And we've tried to provide some clarity for those instances when these curb tight sidewalks are, something that we're backed into, how those are designed, under what circumstances they are and are not permissible, clarifying that these are design exceptions. In the case of a private frontage improvement, these do have to go through the public works alternative process. They're not, by right options. So really trying to clarify these as really our last case scenario for building a sidewalk. But again, looking for mitigation opportunities for those instances when we are kind of backed into a curb tight sidewalk. What options do we have to still accommodate our urban forest? So this is, I think, one of the cooler new additions to the guide. We've provided an option whereby the furnishing zone, it can't always extend into the sidewalk space. But we think that there are locations and instances when it can extend into the curb zone, into the on-street parking area. So clarifying, on street types where the street parking is, very likely not going to be going away anytime soon. When can we provide curb extensions into the parking lane to not only allow for street trees on sidewalks that don't have an adequate furnishing zone to begin with, but even in locations where we want some more robust soil volumes and more robust planting space for larger street trees, where can we expand the furnishing zone into the parking lane? So looking forward to your feedback on these provisions. And then, finally, the last big section of the document I'll draw your attention to are what we're calling our alternative pedestrian walkways. Again, we're trying to provide some options to enable users to respond to context in instances where, a traditional sidewalk as required by our guidelines just isn't buildable for one reason or another. And we've tried to clarify what those criteria are on page 40. And then you'll also see on page 40 a table outlining all of the alternative walkway types, describing what they are, and clarifying what street types are these appropriate on or not appropriate on. And under what traffic conditions would PBOT consider these safe? So what is the maximum speed limit, the maximum vehicle volume on the adjacent roadway, so that these are still, appropriate street types that are usable for people walking. So just to walk you really quickly through these, the first one is sidewalk on one side of the roadway. Our standard requirement is that all streets in a developed city have sidewalks on both sides. But of course, there are going to be instances where we have, topographic constraints or environmental constraints where sidewalks on both sides just aren't buildable. And so we want to acknowledge that as an option. Also, what we're calling our pedestrian path connector. I think we all know, especially in places like Southwest Portland, we have rights of way that are just too steep to provide a traditional street on. But we still want to be able to provide pedestrian and bicycle connections, be that in the form of a path or even in the form of stairs. How can we still provide those connections without necessarily building a full street improvement? pedestrian shared streets where we lower the traffic speeds to as low as 15 miles an hour, provide speed bumps, and therein provide a safer space for people to share the roadway space, people on bikes, people walking, and people in cars all sharing the same space. And then a series of walkways at the side of the road, in places where we're just not able to construct a standard sidewalk. Can we repurpose and paint a shoulder so that there's at least a safe space for people to walk? Or in higher volume roadways, can we protect that shoulder with, a concrete curb like we've recently built up here in on Northeast 60th and Cully or Wands again. So at least there's, a designated place for people to walk. And then finally, maybe there are places where, a standard curb and gutter with an elevated sidewalk aren't feasible, but, can we provide a sidewalk and a furnishing, landscape strip all at the same grade so that the sidewalk is set back from the roadway, and there's still kind of a furnishing strip here. So that's the content. The final section you'll see is just clarifying for users, maintenance responsibility for the various elements of the sidewalk corridor, the sidewalk itself, street trees, the elements within the furnishing zone like tree grates or mulch or artificial mulch, vegetation overgrowth from private property, corners and curbs. We've got, this section will be all filled out, citing the relevant city code section, and then a placeholder for the future material for corners and crossings. So I'm going to stop sharing. I, again, am, really looking forward to your review and your comments. When this goes out next week, we'll have, it'll go out with a comment form so that you'll be able to, identify which section, which page, which sentence you're commenting on, so that we'll have that clarity to kind of absorb and respond to those comments. But I'll stop talking now. I know I've been a little bit long-winded, and, hand it over to the chair.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Really helpful to go through that and all the visuals, of course. It was really fun to see. I want to open it up. I see on my list, Megan, Damon, and Adrian, and Bruce right across the top there. And if that's an okay order, then Megan, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Michelle. Could you actually share your screen again and just go to the very front cover?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Which might seem like a weird place to start, but I just want to make this what seems like an innocuous comment. But in this, you all spend so much time talking about how curb tight is not the ideal scenario. But if you look at your cover image, everything is curb tight. So
oh my gosh, thank you, Megan.
To say that, like, whenever we're trying to portray what our goals are, I would recommend not having that be how we're communicating what our goals are. And I understand that someone else is probably doing that, but I just wanted to quickly bring that up. Another thing which has probably come up, and I know there's a lot of folks that have comments, I am happy to share this later as well, but a couple of things I wanted to go through. One thing, I think there's a couple of situations where you all kind of portray furnishing zones that are very small, and you pictured a tree in those furnishing zones. Currently, urban forestry will not permit the planting of a street tree in a furnishing zone that is less than 3 feet. So I think just being aware that if we're portraying a tree in a furnishing zone in that area, actually there's limitations to what is even allowed because of that. And then one other thing is, I don't know if this is portrayed at some point in the guide, but if there's the capacity to just talk about how trees are a traffic calming device beyond just all of the guidelines to do it, but laying that context specifically along both those industrial and regional corridor zones, not just those pedestrian kind of more friendly zones. I think all of that is beneficial, but I'll stop there. I know there's a lot of other comments. I just wanted to make those quickly.
Thank you very much.
Megan, Damon?
I'll start off by echoing Megan's last comment and asking maybe even to go further and with just more than just the traffic calming, start enumerating some of the values of street trees themselves, such as, you know, cooling the urban corridor, making it more pleasant for pedestrians to actually use the street. So, you know, just maybe a larger enumeration of the value of trees in that pedestrian world. So one of the couple things, so between the tree wells, you have those as a 9-foot minimum. That's across the board, 9 feet minimum for the length of it, no matter what the furnishing zone is in terms of.
That's correct. That is correct. There is, when you review the text, you'll see there is a provision, you know, permitting urban forestry staff to permit tree wells that are narrower in the instance where, you know, there are utility conflicts or other conflicts, but that is the baseline in for every sidewalk corridor. Yes.
Okay. One of the things that science has started to find out is that trees like each other and like to have contact with each other. So by actually creating a root permeable space between tree wells, you can actually increase the vitality of the trees. And if you were to make that or require that surface between the tree wells to be impervious to water, then that might be a way to actually encourage stronger, healthier trees. And instead of having compacted 3/4 minus, like I see out in so many places. And then, so that would be a request for that I would be asking on that. In B 5.3, you have, that's the little tree bump outs. 6 feet is really kind of a very minimal size. And 25 square feet minimum is also a very minimal size. The picture you showed from San Francisco showed, you know, probably something 12 feet long. You know, thinking that if we're just going to take a car space out, that gets you what, 20 feet for a car space. That would be a much more appropriate size, or, you know, but yeah, just having the minimum at 25 square feet is really restricting the future health of the trees. And perhaps we can even encourage below grade soil volumes using soil vaults or other appropriate methods.
Thank you very much. That's a very helpful comment.
And then in B3, what or B 5.3, what situations is that used in? Is that an option or is that a requirement in?
It's an optional strategy requested by the applicant or furnishings or urban forestry staff.
Where the applicant's required to plant trees but wants to do a curb tight.
Right. This approach may be appropriate where there is not enough right-of-way width to accommodate trees within the furnishing zone or where larger soil volumes are desired.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I'll just disclaim, I really appreciate these comments today. I'm unlikely to be able to integrate them into the draft before next Tuesday. So my hope is that I'm taking notes, but anything you're telling me today, please do repeat in your review so that it's well documented, so that the comments are documented for our team. Thank you, though.
Those comments will be in the minutes, right, Brian?
Yeah, I was going to say I can collect all of
perfect.
these and send them to Michelle after that draft is released, just to make sure they get into that phase.
Thank you, Brian. That's super helpful.
Good thing.
Brian, Adrian.
Yes, Michelle, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. So I have a sort of a larger question, and I'm sure it's more of an overlap of multiple agencies, not only the area that you work for. But, given that we're dealing with a climate emergency and, have had some really major events here in Portland recently, expect them to continue. What is in your view, from your perspective, where you're working, what's the opportunity for actually creating a goal for a block, for an area, right, that uses all of these methods to actually improve, the opportunity to have larger trees on a street? How does that process work? And is that going on now? And could it go on?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Honestly, the most substantial and impactful progress we're going to see is through capital projects, through PBOT street improvements. Because of the nature of private frontage improvements, they just happen so incrementally and kind of piece by piece. Eventually they come together and they form a cohesive, urban network. But for example, I was really kind of hot to trot to, put this furnishing zone extension into the guide because I want to see our capital projects moving forward use tools like this so that in the future we have the capacity when we're doing, the 136th corridor or the, division corridor where we're retaining parking, how can our capital projects provide these more robust, planting opportunities? And that's honestly where I see the big change happening moving forward is in PBOT projects.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Adrienne. Bruce?
I had two questions. The first question was, I was a little confused when you said that urban forestry somewhat has some, so my question is, aren't there sidewalk design standards and don't they specify a certain density of the materials underneath the sidewalk, and urban forestry has absolutely no say on that? So when you're saying the silva cells, which potentially could be under the sidewalk, or structural engineered soils, which could be under the sidewalk, urban forestry, I don't see how they have any say over that. That's strictly in the design guideline for the sidewalk, which I assume is a sidewalk standard, which is completely under PBOT control. So I was confused when you said that urban forestry has some say over that. The second question, and it is a short one, is there ever any discussion on the Pedestrian Advisory Committee about the city assuming responsibility for sidewalk repair?
I'll answer the last one first. We would, I think, like you, are interested in taking ownership of tree maintenance. I think we would be thrilled to take over sidewalk repair. I'd also like to, get the roof fixed on my house and paint it, but we just don't have the money. We just don't have it. So until we figure out how to find the money, it's just kind of a non-starter. The first question, I am not familiar in any of the PBOT standard plans and specs of any planting specifications. Yes, socialism, David. I mean, I will go back and circle back with my staff, and maybe Casey, you know more about this than I do, but I'm not familiar with PBOT having jurisdiction over planting requirements. Am I wrong, Casey?
I was a little bit distracted. So can you repeat what the concern was, Bruce or Michelle?
So the goal is to increase the soil volume for trees. And the way you do that is making the space underneath the sidewalk potentially available for trees. But with the current design standards where you have compacted soil that needs to be under the sidewalk, so the sidewalk is stable, tree roots usually can't grow there, or they grow right underneath the sidewalk. So urban forestry has no say over how the sidewalk, what happens underneath the sidewalk. If Damon wanted to put pipes underneath the sidewalk, that's an appeal process or a special exemption. But I want something in the design guide that allows for the, what are they, silva cells or structural engineered soil being underneath the sidewalk. And it seems like that's a PBOT decision. I don't see how urban forestry would have any ability to affect that, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I might just add to that. Yeah, so certainly any new planting standard plans and specs that would call for soil vaults, I mean, would need to be developed in partnership between urban forestry and PBOT, because there is also a lot of stuff that happens below grade in the right of way that we have to work around. But to clarify, you know, none of my colleagues that yes, we maintain standard plans and specs for how to construct sidewalks and the base layer of sidewalks. But when it comes to planting requirements that require subgrade soil cells, none of my colleagues that I've spoken with at PBOT have felt like that is the appropriate jurisdiction of PBOT. Casey, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. So we've been doing a lot of work on the standard construction specs for the city. And that's sort of where some of those types of alternative solutions to enlarge, you know, the underground portion and include silva cells, structural soils, those types of things, that we've been working on getting that incorporated into there. So it is something that we can use. And it's also sort of in combination with, like Michelle mentioned, that we'll be updating our street tree planting guidelines in the future with staffing that we will be getting through the levy. And so those will kind of go hand in hand, so that it is part of our standard planting guidelines, and it's also within the standard construction specs, so that PBOT can say, okay, we're good, because it's in there. And that's sort of where maybe, Bruce, you're talking about the conflict may come when it's not in that standard construction spec book, and then we kind of have to do a lot more talking. And I know Rick is here too, and he's sat in on the meetings with the standard construction spec. I don't know if there's anything you want to add about that, Rick, if you're listening. There he is.
No, I just want to say, I think you nailed it. You got it right on the head. It's a joint effort. You know, we would say this is how you're going to plant the trees, but we need PBOT to be on the same page with being okay for that work going on underneath the sidewalk. So Bruce, you're correct that we can't do it without PBOT, and PBOT, you're correct that you can't do it without us. So, and that's what Casey's saying, is that it is something that once we have more people in time, that's where we're going.
Thanks, Rick.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Bruce. Daniel. And then
Yeah,
Greg.
thank you. And thank you, Michelle. Really enjoyed hearing more of the details here and look forward to commenting on it. I wanted to just step back and talk about constraints a little bit. You had mentioned in several places about, you know, why, for instance, furnishing zones couldn't be wider, or why we're not allowed to do this, or why we're not allowed to do that. And I think it would be very helpful to know, you know, in terms of the code or state or federal regulations, you know, what these constraints really are that prevent larger furnishing zones, more space for trees. And I say that for a couple reasons. And one being, I think we all know, especially after this summer, that climate change is getting worse, and that trees are really one of the most effective ways in the city to combat climate change, at least the impacts of climate change. But yet there's so many different constraints on trees. And we think, when we're just looking at this plan, here's the constraints, that's the constraints, but I'm thinking bigger about how can we change those constraints. So I think if there was some way of understanding what in the code says that you can't do this, or maybe it's the ADA and that's federal, and so you can't do that. I think it would be helpful because we can also look at seeing about changing those constraints, somehow lifting those constraints, obviously beyond the purview of what we're talking about today. But I would be really interested in knowing, because what we're looking at right now with Portland, I'm sure there's cities all over the country also facing exactly the same issues. So it would be really, really helpful to understand what some of those constraints are and where in the city code or other laws that it says you can't do that.
Thanks, Daniel, for that question and comment. Frankly, the biggest constraint to us is not something that's codified. It's just a legal reality, unfortunately, that we are not in a position where we can ask private property owners or developers to dedicate more right of way for sidewalks because of just planning, land use law, and requirements for nexus and proportionality, where the amount of land dedication that we exact from a private property owner has to be proportionate to the impact that that development is creating. And unfortunately, when we get beyond 12-foot sidewalks, beyond 15-foot sidewalks, we get taken to court.
Yeah, I'm not so much thinking about expanding the overall, but for instance, 8-foot sidewalks was presented, whereas the furnishing zone was 4 feet. And I think we all know just from looking at this issue for a long time, that 4 feet really isn't big enough for a large form tree, right? We really need to get that 5 feet. What's preventing you from going 8 feet down to 7 feet? We've talked a lot over the years in this commission about the ADA and what it requires and what it doesn't require. But, I'm just thinking about some of those issues and, what's it going to take to get that 5-foot furnishing zone?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying your question. So in the beginning of the document, we've tried to provide some clarification for why the pedestrian through zone is 6 feet on this sidewalk versus 8 feet on this sidewalk. And what you'll see is that 6 feet is the minimum width for 2 people to pass each other on a sidewalk. 8 feet is the minimum width for a group of 2 and a group of 1 to pass each other on a sidewalk. We only require 8-foot sidewalks on our main streets. So the busiest streets within the busiest pedestrian districts where we have the most people walking and we need to accommodate the most number of pedestrians. And most of our sidewalk corridor widths are 6 feet. So what we've tried to do in the guide is to look for compromise opportunities. Instead of extending the furnishing zone into the sidewalk, extend the furnishing zone into the parking strip. That is the compromise that we found.
Right, but that's only going to be, that's going to be a case by case basis, whether or not that's even possible.
That is true.
Yeah. But when you talk about the limitations of the sidewalk width, are you talking about limitations imposed by the ADA, federal ADA?
The minimum sidewalk width per the Americans with Disability Act is 4 feet. But in the city of Portland, we are not a small city anymore. I don't know any city in the United States whose sidewalk width is 4 feet.
Right, but you're saying that at this point, there's no legal reason why you can't have narrower than.
That is correct. It is
okay.
a functional reason, not a legal reason.
Okay, so that's really helpful to know. And you did mention a technique that a lot of cities around the country have used, which is to extend the tree wells into the sidewalk zone so that just for a very short length of sidewalk, it's less than the length. And it sounded like what you were saying, Michelle, that you were looking at things like just making sure that, what's on the street level, you could put things like the rubber coverings and things like that, or the grates would be a way to get around that.
Correct.
So there are ways, I think, and somebody else had a comment about this too. Sometimes it's not just having those exceptions available, but having the political will to use those exceptions. So I don't know how you get around that.
Yeah, we have tried, I mean, just to be kind of very forthright and transparent, we have tried very hard to walk the line of compromise between providing the pedestrian accessibility that we need in Portland and maximizing opportunities for street trees. We have been, as Casey can attest, we have set the stage internally to work with urban forestry on subgrade treatments for maximize soil volume opportunities. We want to be a partner. We are advocates to urban forestry in that effort. We're looking for opportunities to expand the furnishing zone lengthwise, broadways, every way we possibly can. But we are also, I am the pedestrian coordinator, and part of my job is making sure that we have functional sidewalk corridors. Again, Portland is not a small town anymore. And the fact of the matter is we do have full sidewalks, and we do have sidewalks that need to accommodate more than one person walking down the sidewalk these days. And it's true that 4 feet is the minimum ADA width. But again, the minimum width in Portland is more than 4 feet for a reason. And that's because we need to have a Mississippi, a Hawthorne, a Southwest 23rd, where 3 people can pass each other on the sidewalk without having to walk into the street. And so we're really trying to walk the line between accomplishing our goals and your goals. And, I think we've done a pretty good job trying to look for as many options as we can. I understand that I haven't called for 4-foot sidewalks throughout the city of Portland, and I've done that for a reason. But again, I do feel kind of in my heart of hearts, like our team has done a really good job looking for as many opportunities to maximize soil volumes as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Greg?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Great. I'm talking today on a phone, which means that I gotta say I couldn't actually see any of the text or really even the diagrams. So I'm not going to comment on the specifics till I can look at it. But I do want to ask about coordination of this guideline and the standard details, when the standard details will be updated, and whether they will include standards for sort of like really common changes that are needed. We are currently looking at a lot of proposed heritage trees, and the urban forestry staff who do these inspections can literally say this right-of-way tree doesn't have adequate growing room. And they're tightening up on that because those trees then, if they become a heritage tree, are maintained by urban forestry. So they have the concerns about the sidewalks and the curbs. I would really like to see for some of these larger trees or trees that become large, the option to, and maybe it's radical from a PBOT point of view, but I've seen accommodations where the curbs are just taken out, or the concrete curb is replaced by asphalt. And I'd like to see places where rather than having the tree uplift the sidewalk, we go ahead and say, well, here's a 3-foot or a 4-foot minimum. You can remove this additional piece of the sidewalk because this tree is really important to the pedestrian environment. So I guess question is, will there be standard details that allow for these exceptional circumstances? So we can actually save these large trees?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that comment. And I think, Casey, that might be something I need to work on with you. I'm not familiar with any kind of standard plans and specs specifically as they relate to heritage trees, or if that's something we just deal with on a case-by-case basis. But I agree with you, Greg, that we need to flex and accommodate those special circumstances, and whether that happens through standard plans and specs, or if that just is some sort of codified or non-codified process agreement between PBOT and urban forestry. I mean, I don't know what the right process is, but Casey, I would be happy to work on that with you.
Yeah, and I'd just say that, our street tree planting guidelines right now don't have specificity towards heritage trees. But when we're looking at heritage trees, we are looking at trees that were planted likely long time ago and maybe not in the best of conditions. And so it's more about how do we react to that? Whereas, what Michelle's trying to do is create a more proactive approach to how we do this better from the start.
No, I understand that. I mean, I worked in the city for 15 years. And so I was actually at all the advisory committees for both the bike and pedestrian groups at PDOT, because I was a trail planner at parks. I'm really aware of that. I'm saying, and I'm not limiting this just to heritage trees. I'm just saying there are big trees out there that we'd like to keep for the next 10, 20, 50 years. And what they're doing, because there were narrow furnishing zones, really to me calls for some sort of standard ways to accommodate them. And if that means that, a wheelchair goes through, or a person has to go single file with the couple that they are in for, 8 feet or 9 feet, depending on the pavement scoring. It'd be nice to have those exceptions standard, so every single one didn't have to be invented every time, a tree became an issue.
Right. And I agree with you, Greg. And I think a lot of that will probably happen through the sidewalk repair program. And I have been internally advocating for developing like a tree and sidewalk kind of operating procedure, which I think would be really great to have some guidance on that kind of decision making. And I would love to see that. And I concur.
Yeah, and I think that that's also part of a little bit of what's happening with Streets 2035. And I will say that although it may not be as visibly accessible, there are some approaches that we already take, and we do work closely with the sidewalk repair folks to kind of determine, it's hard to come up with the standards because, as you know, especially if you're looking at heritage trees or just around the city, each case is pretty unique. And so it does, to some degree, take, a unique approach to it. But we do, and we will continue to, work with the sidewalk repair folks to hopefully find more options that are just easily accessible that people think about before, they think about the root cutting or the removal of the tree. But definitely something that's still a work in progress.
Thank you so much for that comment.
Thanks, Greg. Damon?
So this is a great, there's great steps forward for planting new trees and for new developments. One of the things that we've seen over the past few years is large existing trees being removed in development and not being replaced. Because there's just no room for them. How do we get Portland, the city of Portland, to require preservation of, or be stronger in the requirement of preservation for street trees, large street trees that are valuable to the city?
Mm-hmm. And I assume your question would apply not just to streets in the right of way.
It would actually, the focus here is on streets in the right of way. I remember there's a big uproar a year or two ago about a bunch of oaks being taken down in Sunnyside because there was just no space for them with all the other requirements in the furnishing zone and this and that. So yeah, those are big hits. Those are big losses because those are trees that are already functioning to their fullest extent and not having to wait, 30 years for this little sapling to become fully functional.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that is another issue that is being tackled by the Streets 2035 process is when does the sidewalk corridor or any other kind of right-of-way design element kind of flex and respond to that existing tree context? Because I agree, and I think most people at PBOT agree. It's just kind of inane, the idea of like cutting out a tree just to plant another one in a new furnishing zone, like especially these monumental trees that you're kind of hearkening to, Damon. So that is definitely part of the purview of the Streets 2035 process. Which, frankly, has been, the project manager has been on parental leave for the last 3 or 4 months. So it's been a little bit stalled out. So I know it can be frustrating when we say, oh, that's Streets 2035. That's this other thing that we haven't heard about for months. But my understanding is that process will start picking back up soon now that he's back from parental leave.
Can that be a part of the pedestrian design guideline, like a note, just as we were talking about noting the values of trees, that preservation of large trees is a priority?
Probably the path forward I see happening, honestly, is that it was already determined that the Streets 2035 process was the correct venue for establishing that decision-making workflow. And then once they kind of walk us through the outcome, probably what's going to happen is it gets fed back up to the PED design guide and kind of codified there. It's not going to get solved in time, to integrate it into the PED design guide in the next 2 months. But because we're adopting the PED design guide by administrative rule, we are going to have much more flexibility to make this document more of a living document moving forward. We're going to be able to update, amend it, stay on top as these issues get resolved and solved, or as new questions get answered. So that's my expectation, Damon, that it will eventually live in the PED design guide. But I know this is like a totally like bureaucratic and frustrating answer, but we weren't scoped to address that particular problem. We just didn't have kind of the resources, because that's a really big kind of inter-bureau sticking point that has been for a while. And it's just going to take much more time and resources than our particular project has. But luckily that question and the resolution of that question does have a home, and it will happen. And it probably eventually, yes, will get folded back up into our guide on our next revision.
Okay. I just find it's often amazing how much one sentence can drive the bus.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially
for sure.
Yeah. So if you guys can insert that sentence, that'd be fantastic.
Thanks, Damon. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Damon. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. That was going to be one of my questions, was that we could talk a little bit how this fits in the Streets 2035. So that was super helpful. The other thing is just a quick clarification in terms of extending the furnishing zone into the street and taking up potential on-street parking space. Obviously, because of the cost, we're going to see this more in development or capital project situations. But do you see that being something that if outside of those situations, if a property owner wanted to plant a street tree in a curb tight situation as a sort of one-off, do you see that something that might be an option outside of a development process?
Outside of a capital project, you mean?
Yeah.
I do. I mean, because whether it's a capital project or private development review, even if they're building a curbside sidewalk, they're still subject to Title 11. They're still subject and have to provide for those street trees or mitigate. So is my understanding. And so that is what we've tried to do, is provide them an option to provide that code required street tree.
I guess I'm meaning if it's an existing curb tight sidewalk.
Oh, to retrofit an existing
like,
curb
hey,
tight.
I'd love to add a street tree here, even though there's no street trees on my block because it's curb
question.
tight.
Oh, great
Just curious how
question.
this might have planned. I mean, the cost would probably be pretty prohibitive and for most people to do that, but I'm just curious
Right.
if that might be an option.
I see. I misunderstood your question. I'm sorry. It would be an option. I'm guessing that you're right because of the cost. We're probably not likely to see that happen outside of the development review process. But it is an option. Yeah.
Okay, that's great, because I'm just envisioning, what if ARPA federal funds come down for street tree planting and the funds do become available in some surprising situation where we actually could spend that much money to plant a single tree,
And go out and, retrofit Hawthorne and put some street trees between the parked vehicles. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Brian, I have we have a couple of minutes, Michelle. If your endurance is still holding up, I'd love to.
I'm good.
I'd love to bring up another topic that I know we spend a lot of time on. We're really thinking about trees and design with sidewalks here. And we know that, one thing I've been talking about with a lot of folks is that the furnishing area often follows historic practices that have often kept larger furnishing strips in historically wealthier neighborhoods and thinner furnishing strips or smaller furnishing strips in historically lower income, often community of color neighborhoods in Portland, and that holds out. We worked in LA and Jackson, Mississippi, and New York, et cetera, and it's pretty consistent from what I'm observing in Portland as well. And so one of the things I guess I'm thinking about is the extent to which the street design or the pedestrian design guidelines or guide would really take into account the fact that we have by design through historic policy created a very differential set of furnishing strips across the city. And the extent to which I know Angie and Jen and maybe Casey and team really spend a lot of time thinking about low canopy, low income neighborhoods as priorities for trying to think about street trees. And I guess I'm just wondering the lens you're using to kind of contextualize the fact that these sidewalks and these specific furnishing strips are not there just by coincidence or circumstance. There was a very deliberate set of planning processes that reduced the likelihood of trees getting put into certain neighborhoods because they were lower income, because they were communities of color, because they were immigrant communities. And now we have a chance to potentially remediate some of that. And part of my thinking is, as a bigger, broader question, like what's the extent to which the pedestrian guide can actually bring that into the specifications or even the considerations of that 4 versus 5 foot or other idiosyncratic applications that might be possible, like what Angie and Jen and others do with a prioritizing of certain neighborhoods for expansion of tree canopy.
Thank you. That is a really, I think, astute observation and a correct one. You're certainly right. There are clear pattern areas in the city of Portland, in East Portland, for example. These were rights of way that were, and, land that was developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, under county regulation. And it looks different in East Portland. The rights of way look different than they do in Inner Portland, in large part because they were developed under 2 different jurisdictions, right? And 2 different sets of development requirements. So when you get to East Portland, that was originally developed under Multnomah County Development Regulations before it was annexed. They required 5-lane arterials, very skinny sidewalks with no trees or furnishing zones. And so that's not a statement to kind of validate what is so much as it is a statement of explaining why it is the way it is. And you're right, in so much as it creates a very different kind of urban landscape, having developed under those very different development regulations. I think luckily we're increasingly finding ourselves in a position where we're able to retrofit more of those kind of roadways in East Portland that don't have not just robust furnishing zones, but any furnishing zones to speak of. And I think some of the provisions in the PED design guide, I think give us more flexibility as we retrofit those rights of way to correct for those mistakes. So I'm specifically thinking about tree bulb outs into the parking zone. We had a project doing sidewalk infill and bicycle infrastructure on 162nd Avenue. Again, a curb tight sidewalk, a 5-lane arterial, pretty kind of prototypical for the type of right of way you see out there. And the sidewalk infill, was very much following the existing curb line, providing curb tight sidewalks. Had we had the opportunity to use that, 7 to 8 feet of parking zone to provide a new furnishing zone that didn't exist, that would have been a 7 to 8 foot furnishing zone that didn't previously exist, right? So the fact that we now have this new tool in our toolbox, I think is going to help us with these retrofits moving forward. I mean, we are still, I do see, like I said, I do see these kind of massive transformations as kind of being within the wheelhouse of, public capital projects rather than incremental development, in part because we can't ask, one property along a street to move out the curb, or we can't ask one property along the street to dedicate an additional, 15 feet. It just won't legally stand. But if we as like the owners of large corridor projects can come in and, provide those non-existent furnishing zones where they didn't exist, I mean, we can absolutely transform these neighborhoods and these streets. I don't know if that's an entirely satisfying answer. But I mean, we really are trying to give ourselves, tools we haven't had in the last 20 years so that we can retrofit these underserved streets in a better way.
Yeah, it'll make the job. I mean, I will say, yeah, East County for sure, but also I'm thinking about St. John's. I'm thinking about King. I'm thinking about, Brooklyn, Creston, Kenilworth. I mean, I'm thinking about neighborhoods that are also close in. And of course, the Hazelwoods and the Cullies and the Argays. I mean, these are definitely neighborhoods that I hear you on that. I think for Angie and brought up our conversation today, free yard tree giveaway. And when we're thinking about the public median strip, that's exactly where these neighborhoods are going to be really constrained. So thanks for that. I'll keep following up. I'll keep following on this. And I'd also like to just thank all the commissioners for their questions. And of course, your willingness to engage with us and respond to our questions, which, as you probably observed, ranged as well as dug deep. So thank you again. I want to make sure I keep my job and keep our time going, but unless there's anything else, Michelle, I think Daniel and Bruce had a couple of requests earlier on about seeing if there's any information that can be used for the policy committee to digest on Monday, and then being able to follow up with you with some additional comments. That would be great. Gina, Michelle, anything more on your side?
No, just
right, Jenna?
Gina, yeah, you're right.
Gina, thank you.
Thank you. No, just another thank you for having me. Thank you for your very helpful questions and comments. Daniel, I will absolutely get something to you by 5:45 on Monday. Yeah, just look for the draft next Tuesday, Wednesday, and looking forward to your comments. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks,
Yeah,
Gina.
thank you.
Take
Brian,
care.
I'll send you my notes right now.
Great, thank you.
I see Barbara's hand. Barbara, I'll acknowledge you. Want to move into the urban forestry levy budget request discussion, but maybe jump in first.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. So is the report that Michelle just presented, which, if you really look sideways and get real close to your screen, you can kind of see the diagrams and stuff. Is that going to go to the policy committee? I mean, is there some point, and I understand it's not public, but I would love to take a look at that. It's really hard to, but maybe this now is not the time for the entire commission. I'm trying to clarify who's going to get a copy of that non-public draft.
I can forward it to everyone when it's made available for the policy committee. I think that was just PVOT trying to make an extra effort to get that to them before their meeting on Monday.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure thing.
It's been interesting. We've been watching this kind of the first few years I was on the commission, it seemed like there was a real interest in private land. So it was like residential infill, better housing by design, this kind of thing. And all of a sudden we're now thinking about public areas of the sidewalk and the streets 2035. And so it's been a real interesting themes that have been emerging, at least in general. Brian, I don't see a person responsible for the urban forest levy budget request. I forget.
That's me.
Was that you? I thought so. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want to kick it off?
Sure thing. For the last few minutes here, one, we'd like to, I want to circle back to the levy packages that we presented last month to one request if the UFC would like to submit a comment to or a statement to City Council in support of the investments in the urban forest that we're requesting through the levy process. I believe City Council will have a work session in October. And so really with our timing, I could draft the statement, but I would just need the commission to approve that today. And then I can draft it and send it to Vivek for his signature. But also Megan has been your representative on the Parks Bureau's Budget Advisory Committee. And so I'd love to hear from Megan, just sort of an update of what that group's work has been. I think they've had a few meetings so far.
Yeah, so first, Brian, you are correct. So there will be a City Council work session on what is called the fall bump, but it's related to the bump in investment that is coming from the kind of first year additional levy funds that are available. So that is happening in October. There will be our third budget advisory committee of this fall bump, which isn't the standard time this month sometime. Thus far, just for context, I want to say I think it'd be great to submit a letter. The budget advisory committee is also submitting a letter, and after our most recent budget advisory committee, where I tried to bring forward the comments that I've heard from you all, including on the policy committee, specifically about street trees and the lack of its inclusion in it. I did draft comments because Adina specifically asked that we speak about that within our letter. So in essence, the budget advisory committee is putting forward a letter that says, yes, we support this. These are the things that are not included that we want to be included. And Adina specifically asked me to draft some comments about the lack of street tree maintenance. So I'm still going back and forth with the folks drafting that letter to get that in and get some slightly stronger language. They did edit my language, but I think if we wanted to put forward a letter that also said that, I think this is a moment that we really need to drive home the lack of funding for it. I've kind of dug some more into some of the comments, and one of the issues is that they're really basing what is being funded by this levy bump based on the priorities that were set forward from when the levy was approved. And so no matter what, they're not going to put the street tree, even a pilot, in there. I'm learning that, but it's an opportunity for us to say, this is a huge oversight. I think we need to continue to use the momentum of what we all, I think people are paying attention in a way that they haven't. And so I think I can stop talking, and if there's questions, answer it. But I 100% think we should use this opportunity to say, this is an oversight, that this is not in there. This is, we really need to push it. Some of the framing that I tried to put forward was, it's great that we're trying to plant more trees as a city, but if we're not going to match that with street tree maintenance, we're only going to perpetuate inequities. It is a barrier. It is why people decline trees. And I think we really need to drive that home. And I think we need to drive it home as a life or death issue, literally. And so those are my thoughts. I can stop talking so other folks can weigh in. But
Yeah, Megan, thanks. I think that was exceptionally well said and summarized. And just to zoom out to give everyone the context that Megan's really speaking to is the Parks Levy is a sort of step one towards a longer term solution that the Bureau and the Commissioner's Office are working on in terms of long-term funding needs for Parks and Rec. And so there was polling done on street tree maintenance. It did not poll very well for this first round of funding, but comments would be very helpful to continue to keep that issue top of mind, because there will be and there are more long-term funding solutions in the works. I don't know what the timeline on that is, but advocating continuously for street tree maintenance to be included as part of those long-term funding solutions, I think is really important if it's ever going to happen here.
Okay. Any other comments? Questions? All right. Anything else, Brian, Megan?
I think if we could just, sorry, Megan.
Well, you might say this, Brian. You had the idea of the letter, and I'm assuming that were we to do that, we would need to vote on that. Is that what you're going to say, Brian?
Yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say. And I can draft it. It might be just easier for me to do that if we can have a motion to, one, approve a comment letter supporting the levy packages that we presented last month, but also including strong language requesting funding in the future for street tree maintenance, or any amendments to that idea as any of you see fit.
Commissioners, your thoughts on this? Barbara?
So I just wanted to know, I mean, I'd be willing to make a motion. I also just wanted to know, so if you draft that and you know, we give you the okay to draft it, we'll get a copy of it, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, I would like to make a motion that the commission approves the levy funding that we discussed at the previous meeting, and that we add the comments about the fact that street trees should have been part of that, because it's gonna, I think it solves problems before we have problems to have street trees included. Oh, that's not part of the motion. Leave that part out. That's just my opinion.
Okay, yes, I was gonna say, thanks, Barbara. Is this Bruce and Daniel? Is this a second or another comment? We have a motion on the table. Okay, comment, both are comments. Okay. Can Bruce, Daniel, can we vote on this before comment, or is the comment helpful with the motion? Motion. Okay, let's go with the motion. Barbara has a.
No, I was going to say it's relevant to the motion, and I think Bruce is probably also.
All right, you want to comment then, Bruce and Daniel? Yep. Oh, you were good.
Okay.
Bruce, there you go.
I don't like saying this, but I obviously am going to say it. I'm not comfortable with the information that we were provided about the use of the levy funds. Actually, it doesn't talk about the use of the, there are no dollars amount except for very broad figures. I think it's a little, I feel like my role as a member of the Urban Forestry Commission in addressing policy issues is to have more information on which to base those opinions. I understand it's probably a decision on the part of urban forestry to be very restrictive on the information that is shared with us. But I just am not, I think a lot of the things that are planned to be done with the funds are good and admirable and needed. But I'm just not comfortable with the way information is not shared with us.
Bruce, when Claudio gave his presentation, he did give a breakdown of the dollar amounts being requested. Urban Forestry is about 3.5 million, which is actually the largest percentage increase of all of the parks divisions. It's almost about a 50% increase in our resources. So that is the dollar amount. I think it was a round number because we really didn't know the exact dollar amount until about last week when the actual fall bump was requested. But that is, it's about 3.5, almost 4 million of levy funds.
Also, just a quick comment, Bruce, I do from the last, I have some more detailed things that I could share. So I actually don't know if I think urban forestry is withholding information in this context, and I'm happy to forward along the information that I have that gives at least the more detail that I have from the Budget Advisory Committee. So I just want to say I can send along whatever it is that has been recently provided.
Okay, that would be fine. It's true, I didn't look at the 215-page document on Portland Parks and Recreation budget, which maybe has more extensive breakdown.
And if I understand the motion, it's to write the letter, Barbara, is that right? Or are we because we're going to review the letter as well?
Yes. Yeah, it was to write, to give Brian the ability to write the letter, draft the letter.
Okay. We can flesh out details in that letter as needed, but Daniel, do you want a quick comment before we can call to vote?
Sure, yeah, and thank you for those numbers because my question was going to be looking at the presentation that was sent out with the materials for the meeting. It just had like numbers of positions and didn't have dollar amounts, so that's very helpful to see that. I guess a concern I have, and this could probably be answered very quickly, and that is, we know this is a 5-year levy, and there's a big ramp up of a lot of positions. And I just have this concern about the ramping up with new employees. And then at the end of 5 years, if it doesn't get renewed, kind of the disruption. And I'm wondering how much thought there's been given here as to how much can you contract out as opposed to hiring new employees? Because that would certainly be much easier for managing the upward and downward trajectory, especially if we're looking at work that potentially contractors could normally do as opposed to employees. So that was mainly where I'm going with my questioning.
Yeah, honestly, Daniel, I don't have really an answer in terms of what plans beyond the 5-year period. I know that That is a project within Parks leadership to identify what future funding will be at the end of the Parks levy. I don't think the solution is being explored to use contractors instead of staff for things that are traditionally done by staff. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It isn't always necessarily less expensive, really, even to use contractors.
Yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, Brian, I'm thinking more, I was looking at that one photo in there that was talking about park tree maintenance and thinking, wow, are there going to be Portland Park staff members actually doing work that contract arborists could do that are not necessarily kind of staff type positions? And I'm just wondering if any of these new positions are actually going to be doing work that contractors traditionally have done, like actual hands-on tree work.
Yeah, I wouldn't say work that contractors traditionally have done. Park tree maintenance has always been within the purview of urban forestry arborists. And so really we're just expanding that service. I know that the intention here is definitely not to ramp up and then have to ramp down in five years. So at this point we have funding secured for 5 years, and we're going to be ramping up as quickly as we can. And I do see Angie's hand raised on this as well.
Hey, thanks, Daniel, for the question. That question has been raised. And I'll say that the operations levy is part of a longer term strategy that Parks is seeking called Sustainable Futures to get better long-term, more sustainable funding. And so we're viewing the 5-year operations levy as a temporary measure, but as a piece of a larger mechanism for better funding. So although there may be some risk there, I think everything the Bureau is doing is pointing us in a more sustainable direction for funding. And that is why we're seeking primarily to do this work with park staff. And nearly all of, I'm trying to like quickly run through the positions in my head. And I would say that they do all do work that has traditionally been done by park staff. We have very little contract work that happens within parks. You know, we're talking about regulatory work, customer service work, internal administration, you know, expansion, those types of things. And so those are we think are most appropriately done by park staff.
Hey, Damon.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the motion that's on the table is for Brian to write the letter in support of the the levy funding has been presented. And were we going to get a chance to approve this before it goes to council?
That's a bit of the timing issue, is that I'm pretty sure the work session is before the next UFC meeting. So what we're really hoping for here is to approve the content, and I will send it around and try to get some feedback, but obviously real substantive deliberations of the UFC can't happen in private. They need to be publicly accessible. So those would be pretty minor edits that aren't really substantive. So I'm hoping to approve the sort of intent of the letter here.
Could we have that since policy committee is meeting on Monday? Could we have that?
Oh, that's a great idea.
Policy committee.
Yeah, I can have the draft.
Work with policy committee.
That's a great idea. The policy committee is open to the public. I will have the draft ready before that policy committee meeting on Monday, that anyone who wants to attend could attend that to take a look at it and have some comments on it. That's great.
It's like a busy policy committee meeting, Daniel.
Yeah, right. Sorry, Daniel. I hope that's okay.
You guys get an extra coffee.
Yeah.
I then motion to second that
Okay.
as stated.
Damon seconds is the motion. So Virch, we'll call to vote here. Had a set of comments. So all in favor for the motion on the table, Brian writing the letter, raise your virtual or actual hand. Okay, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All opposed. 1. Anjanette, your hand was up for favor, so I'd assume you're favor. So all opposed once again? One. Okay. Any abstaining from the vote? One. Okay. So moved, Brian. Thank you all for your comments. We were really right on time. Apologies for taking us over for 11 minutes over. Thanks for your time here, and I'll go ahead and conclude the September Urban Forestry Commission meeting. So adjourned. And hope you get a chance to enjoy the sunshine before the atmospheric river starts this weekend.
Yes.
All right.
All right, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks.